Now, you could argue that since arriving at Mercedes in 2022, George Russell has made the team his own, allowing Hamilton to feel that his position at the team was being challenged to such an extent the best option was to up sticks and switch to Ferrari. Russell arrived at Mercedes as the junior, however after 3 seasons became the senior driver with the 18-year-old Kimi Antonelli signed alongside him, with the aim of supporting a George Russell title push whilst soaking up as much knowledge and experience as he can. But as we've seen, it's a title push that never really came, but Kimi Antonelli has improved massively as the season has progressed, grabbing podiums, regular points, but most importantly, exceeding expectations. So looking towards the future, is it possible that Russell could be usurped at Mercedes by Kimi Antonelli in the same way that he did to Hamilton? So let's take a look. Now, whether you like him or not, the way that Russell arrived at Mercedes and adapted much quicker to the changing regulations and also different circumstances at the team much faster than Hamilton was quite impressive. Now, he might have rubbed some people up the wrong way by showing a side to himself not seen before, but which enabled him to beat Lewis Hamilton 2 out of 3 seasons. But just to feed into that vibe that Lewis Hamilton got, a 7-time world champion, that feeling that his future was better served elsewhere, was not something that we've really seen before. So with Hamilton out of the picture, Russell could now use his position at Mercedes to make his mark on F1 and go after wins and titles. Now this whole thing occurred to me because from what I've noticed in the latter stages of this season, I'm starting to wonder if Russell and Hamilton behave quite in a similar way when it comes to being challenged by teammates who are perhaps much more junior than they are. Or even, as we've seen in circumstances recently, getting beaten by said teammates. You know, rather than having the mentality of the better man won and I'll have to do better next time, it comes across much more as an injustice to them. It's as if they have the feeling of they couldn't possibly be in front of me, and even if they are, that means that the car is screwed up or the team has screwed up somewhere in the strategy. Either way, they've done me wrong somehow. And we saw this plenty of times when Hamilton was sitting there behind Russell, and I think we've seen enough to make an assumption that Russell probably isn't that keen when Antonelli's in front of him either. And I think this is confirmed even further because we saw even Russell was having tantrums when he was sitting there behind Hamilton. So really the point is, Russell cannot stand being beaten by his teammates. Now, of course, I'm listening to you guys out there and you're probably saying, in order to be a world champion, that's exactly the sort of mentality that you need to have. Like, that's just what's needed to get to the top. And that's very possible considering some F1 champions and also champions in other sports too. The common theme is that they cannot stand being second to anybody and cannot rationalize being outperformed by their teammate, especially when they have far, far less experience under their belt. So although Russell may not be feeling much heat right now, the evidence still suggests that he might be vulnerable to pressure from his teammate. And considering that Kimi Antonelli is finishing the season in a much stronger position than when he started, this raises a lot of interesting questions. Most importantly, how is Kimi Antonelli's career going to look like? Where is the line of trajectory here? Now, when Antonelli was signed and announced by Mercedes, the news surprised everybody. And only Toto Wolff will truly know why he went with extreme youth and inexperience over someone perhaps more seasoned. But then perhaps he wanted to replicate the Red Bull and Max Verstappen model rather than having to go through the drudgery of loaning a young driver out for a few seasons and then bringing them back if they're good enough. And so with that, Antonelli was immediately thrown into the deep end, but he showed us he could swim. He showed us that he's actually quite good. With a pretty consistent first third of the season, followed by a little mid-season wobble, and then a pretty decent end to the season. So overall, Antonelli has done a great job in his debut and also rookie year in Formula One, and I think has earned a place at Mercedes for years to come. But now for George, this poses a difficult situation because not only did Antonelli come in as a proper rookie, he's also grabbed some silverware and managed a pretty good haul of points, all things considered. And for Toto Wolff, it means his decision and that massive gamble he made on signing Antonelli has paid off, and I sense that he is going to want to make that payoff increase year on year. which potentially could mean allowing Antonelli to pile the pressure onto George and give equal treatment or even perhaps preferential treatment if the performances are stacked in Antonelli's favour. Meanwhile, allowing Toto Wolff to appear even more like a genius for bringing Antonelli into the team. And then if Russell has a problem with this, well, perhaps this is the way things are going to be done at Mercedes now. And if there's a problem, there's a door in front of you. You might have to look for a driver and that level of superiority that you want elsewhere. But looking at this realistically, could George Russell really be toppled as the guy at Mercedes by Kimi Antonelli, just as the way that he did to Lewis Hamilton? I'd say absolutely he could. I don't see any reason why not. However, it won't be for a little while yet. Now, I'm not going in for a bit of George bashing here. In fact, he is one of the drivers I do support on the grid, but like any reasonable person, I recognise that there are good sides and there are also bad sides. For example, right now, I'll stand by saying that if the car is right, I think George Russell could easily hold his own against the likes of, say, Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri. In fact, why not? I'll go a little bit further and say that if he was driving that 2025 McLaren, he would have won the World Championship. However, where the cracks start to appear with George is with his mentality and his perception of the team around him, also including with that his teammates. And much like Hamilton did, I'm sure Russell views Mercedes as his team. He worked his balls off for years at Williams to get to this position now, and he's going to be damned if he's going to give that up lightly. And furthermore, I'm sure he's not too pleased about the timing of his Mercedes drive coinciding with the team's slump and championship-less years, if championship-less is a word. But the worrying signs is that already we've seen George getting flustered and frustrated when he is behind Antonelli in a race. And we've heard him on the radio frantically giving this sales pitch to the pit wall as to why Antonelli should let him past. However, when they're both on pretty decent pace, there's no reason really why Antonelli should let him by. Now, in his mind, I'm sure this comes across as very intelligent, very calculated and forward-thinking. But to you and me and the rest of the F1 world, I'm sorry, but it comes across and reeks a bit of entitlement and also a little bit of desperation as well. And entitlement is the key factor here. Russell must not allow himself to have any sense of false security or entitlement which can allow Antonelli to creep in and win a majority favour within the team. And after all, I think it's safe to say that Hamilton developed this similar sense of entitlement at Mercedes after years of having Valtteri Bottas as a teammate and having any of his wants, needs or desires completely taken care of by the team. And then as we saw, suddenly George Russell arrived and the whole Hamilton-Mercedes love story came crashing down. All because a large chunk of it was built on this sense of false security and entitlement. So in my opinion, George has to absolutely learn from this and take nothing for granted, especially from Toto Wolff. Because right now, Russell absolutely has the advantage against Antonelli in terms of race finishes, but also in qualifying, where he has absolutely beaten Antonelli outright in that department. However, though, come 2026, that could all change. With new regulations come new challenges, and this means as well that the playing field has been levelled. Aside from some sim work, everyone is starting from the same position in getting a feel for these new regulations and how to get the best out of the car. But Russell's main advantage came during qualifying, where he outqualified Antonelli by quite a large margin. However, though, if Antonelli was to turn this around in 2026 or, years onwards, this could pose quite a serious threat to George. And I don't see any reason why not. If Antonelli continues this trajectory of growth throughout 2026, let's not expect too much from him next season. 2027 and 28 could be very, very interesting at Mercedes. Those will be the years where we're going to see what George Russell is really made of. Can he stand up to it, or will he do what Hamilton did and feel that his desires are better served elsewhere? Because, of course, let's remember, what goes around comes around, and if George finds himself making the same mistakes as Hamilton did, Mercedes could slip out of his grasp and into Antonelli's. Cheers, guys. Be sure to like, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again later.